Welcome to the Memetune program, Series 3, Episode 3. Coming up today. Switched on goes Tron. In Synthesizer Club, it's Moog o'clock. Little Black Boxes features a Super JX. Patching today is on the legendary Crystal Machine. And in Video Lab, we look at something a bit more up to date, but it's still over 20 years old. Here's Switched On.
Holds a dark secret. Hidden within its operating system is a magical kernel, a secret formula that produces pristine digital tones. But it was not supposed to be there. It was an illegal digital alien, a ghost in the machine.
Here we have the digital keyboard Synergy from 1982, which uses two distinct methods for creating sounds. The first is additive synthesis, which I've described in an earlier episode. The second is FM synthesis, and this is where the Synergy had to be very discreet, because Yamaha had such a firm grip on the license for FM synthesis. Let me explain. In the mid-1960s, a young man called John Chowning was experimenting with digital sine waves, trying to find a way of placing them in 3D space. By pure chance, he discovered that if you cross-modulated them at audio rates and at various depths, you could create complex and interesting sounds. Because the oscillators were digital, very precise and repeatable results could be obtained. He gained access to the AI lab at Stanford University in California. There, between 1967 and 1971, he developed the FM synthesis algorithm, which included creating a huge palette of sounds. He was able to do this by using the enormous PDP-6 mainframe computer, which he had access to in downtime. He was smart enough to get a patent on the technology through the university, who eventually sold the license to Yamaha in 1971, who were looking at developing their range of keyboard instruments. It took Yamaha and Chowning a further decade to perfect the technology, and they were able to produce a commercial keyboard in 1981, the Yamaha GS1. This was a preset-only instrument and didn't yet have full FM synthesis capabilities. This was to come in 1983, when Yamaha unleashed the massively popular DX7 synth. And then the flagship DX1 a few months later, which had double the power of the DX7 and featured a wooden keyboard and case. All throughout the development process, Yamaha protected their secret technology fiercely, knowing how revolutionary it would become. And that's why synths like the Synergy shrouded their FM capabilities in secrecy. As a side note, Wendy Carlos was involved in the development of the Synergy, and in 1981 used its predecessor, the GDS, to make the completely digital soundtrack to the movie Tron. But it was Yamaha who fully exploited the power of FM synthesis in their DX range, which lasted right through the 1980s. Let's head to the Memetune Synthesizer Lab to explore the sound of the DX series in more depth. The first thing to do when programming the DX is forget everything you know and love about synthesis. We no longer have complex waveforms that we shape with a filter. Our building blocks are sine waves, envelopes, and initial pitch and level controls, which in combination are called operators. These are further combined into algorithms. Each algorithm determines how the building blocks go together. The simplest FM algorithm has two operators, two sine waves, two envelopes, and two sets of level controls. In this algorithm, operator 1 is the main output, or carrier, and its envelope shapes the notes we hear. Operator 2 produces the timbre control, or modulator, and its envelope shapes the way the timbre evolves, because the depth of the FM is changed over time, and this is the key principle to FM synthesis. On the DX5 you can have up to 6 operators and 32 algorithms. In other words, 32 ways the operators can be combined. Let's program a realistic piano sound to demonstrate a more complex patch. First, let's initialize the settings so everything's at 0. Now we set up the envelopes for operator 1. The envelope is really confusing because the higher the value for the time setting, the shorter it gets. And it's not helped by the fact that the manual describes this the wrong way round. Now we set the envelopes for the remaining 5 operators. Now we can set the pitch values and mixer levels for all 6 DCOs. Here's how it sounds. And here's how it sounds when you change just one parameter. The DX5 was like having 2 DX7s in one box. So one thing I like to do is set 2 slightly different patches and then pan them hard left and right. Here's our finished piano. Here's another DX demo. What's the time? It's Moog o'clock. The Memetune Programme Annual 2023.
4.
Today, we have something a bit different. I'll be patching the Crystal Machine, a very vintage double synthy A with KS sequencer and purple fluorescent lights. This synth was put together by the British space synth legend Tim Blake, together with laser designer and light artist Patrice Warrener in the late 1970s, as you can probably tell by the way it looks. The modifications to both machines were performed by EMS's original service engineer Graham Wood, and these date back to the mid-1970s. It's on loan from my synth tech and friend Keith Lucid Sound. Both Keith and Tim Blake were members of seminal space rock band Hawkwind, but the Crystal Machine also has its own legacy, being the namesake of Tim's solo project, starting with his 1977 debut album. Tim's work in various projects is really great, and I urge anyone into strange British electronic space music to search out his synth playing with Gong, Hawkwind and Crystal Machine. The device itself is very interesting, as it has two different versions of the Synthy A alongside each other. The left-hand unit is a Mark II, being made around 1973, and the other one is a Mark I from May 1971. They go particularly well with the Mark I VCS3 and other EMS gear I have put into my own system. The patch itself will be trying to connect all three synths together, which is surprisingly difficult to do with this early 70s EMS gear, as I'll explain in today's patch. To start, I'll send a VCO into the filter of the Mark I Synthy, then send the filter to the envelope, which has a built-in VCA to shape the first part of the sound. I'll plug the sequencer pitch output to the VCO. Now let's record in an 8-note sequence. I can then speed it up as desired. Next, I'll use my favourite synthy trick of using the ring mod to add a super snappy version of the notes. One side of the ring mod will be a second VCO. The other will be the sequencer output. This has the effect of forcing the ring mod to act as a very punchy VCA, with the signal being shaped by the sequencer voltage. It sounds like this. As mentioned earlier, synths are not easy to sync together. So I'll be using the pitch to CV converter to give me a workaround. I'll take one of the control outputs and send it to the converter signal input. This unit will generate a trigger based on this input, and the VCS3 envelope will be triggered directly using the connectors at the back. Now I can set up a simple patch on the VCS3 as before, VCO to filter to envelope, and this time I'll add a bit of spring reverb. Off screen I'm going to use the Moog sequencer to generate a simple 16-step pattern to vary the pitch of the VCO. So I'll take the trigger out from the converter and send it to trigger the Moog sequencer. Now, I'll use the Mark II Synthy to add a bass line. I'll send a VCO into the filter. And use another row of the Moog sequencer to change its pitch. I'll send the Moog to the Synthy Mark II signal input and patch this external input to control the pitch here. The last sound will be a white noise pattern. I'll send the noise signal to a new output and then use the secondary envelope output of the first synthy, which they call the trapezoid, to shape it. The main output of Synthy 2 is going through the 8-octave fixed filter bank. So today's patch is all about using multiple sounds from these three instruments and trying to lock them all together. Sometimes the triggers misfire and it shifts the patterns around a bit, but this all adds to the cybersynchronicity-ness of the whole operation. And that's today's patch. Behold, dear viewer, another of Roland's gifts to the world of electronic music. The very first little black boxes. The MKS range of shrunk-down synthesizers. In 1984, Roland began releasing a slew of delightfully distilled devices, exploiting the newly developed MIDI protocol. The MKS-70 contained the heart and soul of the JX8 and JX10, using digital oscillators and analog filters, making it what I like to call a digilog synthesizer. And it sounds like this. In this episode, I'll be taking a close look at my main video mixer, which serves as the central hub of the Memetune Video Lab. It's called the Grass Valley Indigo AV Mixer, and although it's quite small, it packs a lot of functionality and greatly expands the workflow in the lab. The Indigo was released around 20 years ago and was aimed at small broadcasters and production centres. Its basic function is to provide a way of generating live broadcast programmes by allowing an operator to switch between many video sources using the control panel, a process called vision mixing. Around the back, you can connect up to 12 video sources, any of which can be selected as the main output with the buttons along the front. The sources appear on buttons here. These are the clips I've made before they go into the Indigo. The first thing we can do is change the colour and contrast settings for each video source. Each source has 2 selection buttons, the idea being that in a live situation, the operator can see the various video sources using multiple monitors and then use the lever arm to make a transition from one source to another. There are many different types of transition available on this mixer. Here's a few of them. The next thing to explore is the idea of key layers. These are extra layers that can be added on top of the main video output, and there are 2 of them. They really add to the complexity of the videos that can be produced. Let's have some fun! Well, that's it for the Memetune programme, Series 3, Episode 3. Thanks for viewing.